Hey. Thank you. Good afternoon, and welcome to our final ultimate session of the third annual Budget Summit, or the 37th annual KJ's birthday. Yay, yeah. Thank you so much. It's amazing to see all of you here today. I am impressed that there are so many people in Oklahoma that are as nerdy as I am. Yeah, this is really good. And it's been really encouraging this morning to see how many of you are asking, what can we do about this? We know the data. What can we do? I see a lot of people who are ready to take some action and get something done. Oklahoma is in a difficult situation, but we didn't get here by accident. And I like to say that any problem that people made, people can change. That's right. We are seeing people all over Oklahoma who are fired up and ready to go, ready to do something different. We always sell out for the State Budget Summit. This year we sold out even earlier, and that tells me that Oklahomans are ready to do something different, ready to take action. And I think before we know what to do, it's helpful for us to get a little bit more perspective in a visceral way on what exactly it feels like to have these budget cuts, and how it's not just one piece of the budget pie. It's not just that education's being cut. It's that we have this budget that seems to be some sort of incredible shrinking pie, and everyone is hurting. And so, without further ado, we will hear some more of the human side of the state budget cuts. Please welcome to the stage many humans from many Oklahomans who are dealing with this every day. Thank you.
Does that make me a secular human? Anyway, my name is Craig Sutter. I'm the Deputy Executive Director with the Oklahoma Indigent Defense System. It's kind of a long name, so I'm going to go by the acronym OIDS. We are a state agency that provides criminal defense services to those who are charged with a crime and cannot afford counsel. You're familiar with the Miranda warnings, if you can't afford a lawyer, one will be appointed. Well, we're it. We're also kind of the 800-pound gorilla when it comes to providing those services here in the state of Oklahoma. And by the way, we are a state agency. We operate with our main offices in Norman and 6 satellite offices scattered throughout the state. We've got 65 attorneys on staff, again, in these different offices, and at any given time, approximately 120 contract attorneys that provide these services. Last year, we handled just under 50,000 cases. It would be nice if we could reduce that amount, but unfortunately, we don't have any control over that. The courts appoint us. They appoint the agency when services are needed, and we're not in a position to say, sorry, no, we can't take that case, Judge. We just don't have the staff. We don't have the funds. It doesn't work that way in the real world. So I kind of wanted to quickly tell you what happens, and this isn't theoretical. This isn't some abstract thought. We went through this in 2002, and I'm afraid we're about ready to do it again. Back in 2002, we, of course, had a big budget crisis. All state agencies were cut. Appropriations were reduced. Ours was as well. And we got to the point where we could not hire attorneys to go out and handle those cases in which the attorney we already had on staff or under contract had a conflict of interest. We have a budget to handle those kind of cases. We call them conflict cases. We didn't have the money. And under state law, we can't go out there and enter into a contract if we don't have the funds. I think we all know that. It's technically a misdemeanor, and there's also personal liability in doing so. So what we said, and it's like in any other agency, if you got to cut back services, you got to cut back services. But if you're beholden to the courts and you have this responsibility, that's not an option. Long story short, when we couldn't afford conflict counsel, we filed motions with the courts throughout the state saying that we didn't have the funds and that we couldn't provide a lawyer. And the response of the judiciary was to hold our executive director in contempt. And by being held in contempt means potential jail time. So we had these cases spring up all over the state. I spent a whole lot of time going and litigating this issue throughout the state, trying to keep my boss out of jail at the time. And we first went to the Oklahoma Supreme Court asking, gee, can we access money out of the local court funds? The court was kind of in the same boat we were, and they said, well, basically, no. So then we went back to the Court of Criminal Appeals, and I made the argument to it. And by the way, the Court of Criminal Appeals is the court that has exclusive jurisdiction over all criminal cases. And so I went back, and I was trying desperately to get my boss out from under these contempt proceedings. So we had a lot of briefing involved in it. We had argument over it. And the court turned around and came out with what was actually, I thought, a very well-reasoned decision, but it's kind of a scary decision. It was scary back then, and it's scary now. And what the court said was that I recognize that, or the court recognizes that the indigent defense system doesn't have the funds to provide counsel. So here's the deal. It's going to take thousands of hours to litigate this issue. It's going to take a huge sum of money to try to work through it. There are issues here, constitutional issues. There are issues of separation of powers between the judicial branch and the executive branch. And the opinion went on and on about that and said, but at the end of the day, the problem here is that we've got individuals that have been sitting in jail for 6 months and they don't have counsel and they're waiting trial and there's no hope on the horizon here. So what the court said was that this is the state's responsibility to provide counsel to indigent defendants. You know, if you want to hold the executive director of voids in contempt, you know, do whatever you think it is you need to do. But at the end of the day, if these individuals don't have counsel, and by the end of the day, I mean within 10 days, they will go free. That's the upshot of it here. If the state can't provide funding to provide representation to an individual charged with crimes, they will be released, and our Court of Criminal Appeals has said that. Now, we were able to address that by then going back to the Oklahoma Supreme Court and getting an arrangement together whereby there was more or less a guarantee that we would get a supplemental appropriation the following spring to enable us to then jump in the middle, get conflict attorneys for these individuals, and keep the whole system moving forward. The whole system got a lot better. Appropriations situation improved, and we were able to get out of that mess. I have no idea where we're going right now. Don't know what it's going to look like. And I'll just say that, you know, our agency is part of that criminal justice chain, and any chain is only as good as its weakest link. And if we're not funded, then basically the system runs a risk of grinding to a halt. So I would just ask everybody just to be cognizant of our plight, our issues, the right to counsel, why it's important to every citizen of Oklahoma that right is upheld. And hey, if you can put in a good word for us and anybody you might know, any legislators otherwise, please do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. I forgot to mention that these brave souls have been held to a 3-minute maximum on speaking, which is really difficult, and I hope that you commend them afterwards for their efforts, and also take the time to get to know their stories. There is an informational insert in your packet that says who these folks are, and I hope that we hear more from their stories in the future. I wish we could give them more time, but you know, budget cuts.
My name's Dan Billingsley. I'm a Vice President of External Affairs with the Oklahoma Center for Nonprofits, a statewide organization that builds capacity in our nonprofit sector. And as a good Episcopalian, I will keep this very short. I am a nonprofit employee. On top of that, I am a board member of other nonprofits. I'm a volunteer. I'm a donor. I'm an advocate. I'm an ambassador. And even with that Episcopal upbringing, I'm also an evangelist for this group. Our sector is probably one of the most amazing in the country. And having worked in nonprofit arena all over the country, I can tell you that Oklahomans are incredibly generous. I've heard the number that we're top 3 or top 10 or top 5, but what I will tell you is that every single person in this room is probably in the same position I'm in as a donor, a board member, an employee, et cetera. So we are an enormous sector. We employ 10% of the workforce in Oklahoma. There are more than 18,000 nonprofits. Most people don't realize how big it is. We sustain communities, we educate, we care for people, we entertain people, we challenge people. It's a lot going on. Most importantly, though, we have limits. The nonprofit sector is stretched incredibly thin. When our numbers are the way they are, 49th, 48th, 50th, the numbers we hear every day, who do you think picks up the slack? I see nonprofit colleagues here. I see Rodney Bivens. He can tell you exactly who is picking up the slack to help Oklahomans not just thrive, but survive. My call to action is very, very simple. The philanthropic and nonprofit sector here, we can only do so much. We need to engage our legislators, our policymakers, to make strategic, long-term investments in education, in healthcare, social services, public safety. If we don't do that, the nonprofit sector cannot pick all of that up. We need to create smart, happy, healthy, safe communities. We need to race to the top, not to the bottom. I want to tell you all something that's really interesting. Who do you think gives the most money to charity? Individuals. And it's individuals making less than $100,000 a year. That's who is supporting our nonprofit community. So right now, my call to action is really simple. It's give, advocate, evangelize if you must, talk to your policymakers, ensure that we don't enact legislation that prevents nonprofits from meeting their mission, that prevents philanthropists from making those investments in the community. I would also suggest that OK Policy is a 501c3. I'm sure that they have donation cards at the back. But do support your local nonprofit sector. Thank you.
Hello. Whoa, that's loud. My name is Meredith Exline. I'm first and foremost a parent of two children, one a middle schooler and one a high schooler. I'm also a coordinator of a public advocacy group for public education, Oklahoma Central PLAC, and I'm currently a school board member. When my daughter entered third grade over 7 years ago, I noticed an emphasis that was placed on testing in the spring. The more I learned, the more I understood that they were a direct result of the state and federally mandated tests. The regulations became more confining as I began my legislative advocacy adventure. I started to realize that now a teacher's evaluation could be based on a test score. A third grader could be held back and prevented from going to fourth grade from a test score. Our schools were given a letter grade because of a test score, and our high schoolers now were down to a test score of being able to obtain their high school diploma. We have become a state who places more value on a test score than the quality of instruction. All the mandated testing has cost attached to them. The extra tests mandated by our state cost millions of dollars, including the EOIs, which are meaningless to our students going to college or seeking employment. As my daughter researches colleges, not one of them have asked for her EOI scores. They only want to know what her ACT is or her SAT score is. All these mandates, in turn, cause our districts to spend more money on additional testing to ensure our students meet the mark and obtain a good report card. The competition model has an adverse effect on our schools, causing a test prep culture. During this economic downturn, a time when schools continue to be given less to educate more students and now are having to cut great programs, we need to stop unnecessary mandates and edicts. We elect school board members to govern our schools. It's time that we give the authority back to local control and only use testing that drives instruction, costs us less money, and give way to authentic learning that moves our kids to be creative innovators, problem solvers, and productive citizens of our communities. These children, they're our future. They deserve better. And as citizens, regardless of their party affiliation, it is time to come up with a better solution for our precious commodities, our children. It shouldn't be about being red or blue. We have to work together to do what is best for our children, and that's my call to action to each of you. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Jimmy Leopard. I'm the CEO at the hospital in Wagner, Oklahoma, and I'm also the chairman of the board for the Oklahoma Hospital Association. State budget cuts to hospitals occur through reduced appropriations to the Oklahoma Healthcare Authority, which in turn results in reduced Medicaid payments to hospitals. The hospitals of Oklahoma have had their Medicaid payments cut over the last 5 years by 14%. We anticipate more cuts later this year. My hospital is currently on a salary and wage freeze, and we are evaluating several service lines to see if we can continue to afford to offer them. Closing services in hospitals means that patients can't conveniently access the services that they need. Budget cuts to the Medicaid program adversely affect payment policies. For example, in behavioral health, Medicaid only pays for one history and physical and one psychiatric evaluation per enrollee per year. These patients sometimes require several hospitalizations per year, but we only get paid once per year providing these assessments, which are required each time a patient comes to the hospital. Also, in general, Medicaid will not pay for hospital readmissions within 30 days of discharge if a patient comes back to the hospital with the same or a similar diagnosis. When this happens, it is almost always due to patient noncompliance with their discharge plan. Also, if a patient leaves against medical advice after coming to the hospital within 48 hours of admissions, we do not get paid. Medicaid timely filing policies have been cut in half. So if Medicaid is the secondary payer and the primary payer does not pay within the timeline, Medicaid will not pay us either. In wound care, Medicaid patient visits are lumped into the patient's primary care visit allowance. And if they go over 4 visits in a month, then we are not paid for the remainder of the visits. But in addition to the uncompensated care challenges that hospitals face, patient care and quality of life are also adversely affected by budget cuts. I just mentioned wound care, so I'll give you an example of a wound care patient. Medicaid will not cover for hyperbaric oxygen therapy services for Medicaid patients. So some patients have to have amputations without first having had the benefit of trying hyperbarics to save their limb. For Medicaid patients who suffer from sleep apnea, where they stop breathing in the middle of the night, Medicaid will not pay for sleep studies. So therefore, they go undiagnosed and untreated, and most likely will experience more serious and more costly health issues later in their lives. So what should be done? The Healthcare Authority should not be placed in a position to have to change their payment policies to adversely affect providers and patients. Many rural hospitals in Oklahoma are on the bubble and can't take many more cuts and remain open. Some physicians are also starting to close their practices to Medicaid, creating an access issue in some markets. Given the incredible state budget deficit, our state has to get creative. We should repeal the income tax cuts, and we need to look for other funds to help us. You can get ready to clap on this one. Our governor and our legislator should accept the $9.9 billion of federal dollars that are available and broaden coverage for the uninsured through the Insure Oklahoma program. These federal dollars take a lot of the burden off of the state, as they can be used to fund various state agencies. State dollars would then be freed up to help with other challenges we face, such as education. You know, hospitals also get cuts from Medicare through savings that are being used to fund insurance programs in other states, like Arkansas, which has taken the federal funds that are available to it, and they cover their insured in that state with great success, while we sit here next door and deal with the 4th highest uninsured rate in the nation. In closing, I'd like to remind you that public opinion, even among Republicans, is changing in favor of accepting the federal dollars to help our state's budget crisis. In recent polling conducted by CMA Strategies, 3 times as many voters polled desired to accept the federal funds to help to cut the budget deficit versus other options such as increasing taxes, cutting public safety, reducing education spending, or cutting roads and bridges spending. I implore you to talk to your legislators about these 4 benefits of bringing these federal dollars into Oklahoma. These benefits have been studied extensively and are well documented by the OSU Department of Economics. I encourage you to write these down. If we start accepting the $9.9 billion this year, then over the next 8 years, we would be able to significantly reduce the number of uninsured in our state. We would experience a $18 billion positive economic impact. We would create 24,000 new jobs, and we would realize $620 million in increased state and local tax revenues. Folks, it's time we set politics aside, take the federal money, and never waste a good crisis. Thank you.
My name is Mikey Gilmore, and I'm a public school teacher in Oklahoma City Public Schools, but I'm actually here to talk to you today about student loan debt. My bachelor's degree is in theater, and I very quickly after I graduated with that degree, with no student loan debt, became a public school teacher through our alternative certification program. And I had to seek additional education hours, and because I had to go back to school anyway, I went and got a master's degree. And that is where I incurred lots of student loan debt. Not as much as I have now, because of the interest that's piled up since then. I actually owe more on student loans than I do on my house. I'm gonna let that sink in for just a minute. I owe more on student loans than I do on my house. And I got this degree to do this job that doesn't pay me enough to make the payments for the degree that I got to do the job. So I'm stuck in that trap. And the only reason I live comfortably now is because I'm not making loan payments. Here's why. My loan servicer thinks that I can pay almost $500 a month, that's reasonable with what I make as a public school teacher. And I can't. That's the bottom line. I can't. My husband is also a teacher. We're both public servants. I don't have an extra $500 a month lying around. I would love to make some form of payment, but they won't take less than that. I have to pay what they have decided is the minimum or nothing. So it could be not accruing all of this interest if I could be making lower payments, but they don't allow that. So that is the situation that I'm stuck in. And student loans are presented as a way out of this trap that I'm in. We tell people to get loans and go to college so that you can get a better job, so that you're not in this situation that I'm in. So the one thing that I want to say about education that I promised Kara I would not go into is that, yes, obviously we should be paying teachers better because I'm going to be there, I'm going to be doing my job regardless of what I get paid, but it'd sure be nice to live comfortably. And so my call to action that we've all been asked to make today is that you do talk to your legislators and you do what Scott Inman said, but what's really more important is that we all do that. One voice, it's helpful, sure, if I go stand in my legislator's office. But if all of us were talking to our legislators, that's where we have power. We have power in numbers. And if you don't believe me, I invite you to my school cafeteria at lunchtime to hear what hundreds of voices sound like at the same time. And so that's what I would like to ask you to do, each of you, to approach your legislators and ask them that we provide fiscal policies for our state that make sense. Thank you.
Thank you all. They're doing a great job, aren't they? We're running on time. Thank you so much, speakers. We've got some more folks coming up. I wanted to mention as well that many of our speakers, while you have their professions in your folder on that list, they are speaking as an individual and not on behalf of their organization. It's nice to be in a room full of reasonable people who realize that we need these solutions. I want to tell you just a little bit about Together Oklahoma so that we can start moving towards figuring out how we do exactly what Mikey was just talking about. You see, I'm a fourth-generation Oklahoman. My great-grandfather was a sharecropper. He was a single dad with 8 kids, and he made it through the Dust Bowl not knowing how he was going to put food on the table day to day. I know that Oklahomans have been through tougher times than this. But in my experience as outreach and advocacy specialist with Oklahoma Policy Institute, what I find is that reasonable people like y'all who care about these things and want something different are all over Oklahoma. Everywhere I go, I find more folks who care that say, I don't need a tax cut. I need my kid to be in a classroom with less teachers. I need to have adequate medical care. I need to know that my community is safe. Those are the things that Oklahomans care about everywhere, but what we find is that people feel very alone. And people also feel nervous about talking to their legislators. And so the Together Oklahoma Coalition is that place where we can go after we wake up. It's to augment our own desires to be an advocate and work together strategically. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that in a moment, but let's hear some more from the front lines.
Hi, I'm Laura Morrison, and I'm the Executive Director for Central State Community Services, Oklahoma. And I'm here today because I am seeing unacceptable things like wage cuts, employee benefit cuts, terminations, layoffs, service reductions, service fees increased for people who can least afford it. Central State is a nonprofit organization providing Medicaid and state-funded services, residential and vocation services to adults and children with developmental, cognitive, intellectual, and other disabilities. We currently employ close to 600 people across Oklahoma. 99% of our employee pool are direct support staff making only $8.35 an hour. $8.35 an hour. These staff most often have to work 2 jobs just to make ends meet. These are the people making $8.35 an hour, caring for some of the most vulnerable people in our communities. As a direct result of the 3.5% reimbursement rate reductions that providers like us received back in September of 2015, we were forced to make budget cuts that have significantly negatively impacted the 600 employees, the almost 300 people receiving our services, and quite frankly, the quality of the services we provide. For example, we have had to eliminate 2 administrative people. I had to lay them off. We cut all administrative staff wages. We are the Social Security representative payee for about 125 people across Oklahoma, and we had to increase the fee that we charge them, people who can't really afford an increase in a fee. We discontinued the employment of 2 people who we provide services to, and those 2 people with disabilities have not been able to find another job. We are eliminating all non-essential company-leased vehicles, so now those staff making $8.35 an hour are being required to use their own personal rundown vehicle that they can barely afford to provide services to the people, to provide transportation to the people receiving the services. We have discontinued funding for our employee safety incentive program, for our employee good character initiative, and for our employee, we've completely discontinued our employee drug and alcohol random screening. We no longer pay any portion of our employees' dental or life insurance premiums. We no longer give an employer match for the employee 401k contributions. And last but certainly not least, because I could just go on for a lot longer than 3 minutes, employee costs for our group health insurance were significantly increased. The employee's portion of the premium increased by 25%. The plan deductible increased to $5,000. And the out-of-pocket maximum increased to $6,350 for 99% of our employee pool making $8.35 an hour. Any further cuts to our funding will result in direct support staff wage reductions. Reduction, if not elimination, of services to those vulnerable people in our communities. Think about our employees and the people receiving our services being one of your family members, one of your son or your daughter or your sister, your brother, your mother, your father. They deserve better, don't they? So I'm asking you, we really need you and others to talk with, to visit with your legislators and insist that they find alternate Sustainable, that's the key, the sustainable funding, rather than continuing to reduce the budget. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being invested and thank you for being here. I can't wait to get home to tell my wife that we now live in Kansas. I didn't realize that. It's been a long journey, but unlike Dorothy, we do live in Kansas. That being said, we've been asked today to give a short scenario of our own individual aches and pains dealing with the budget. I'm from Oklahoma Public Schools. We have about 750 kids. We're a rural school in Muskogee County. 54% of our budget is made up of state funding or state revenue. I tell you that to tell you that although all schools are funded the same, not all schools are funded or supported by the same funds. I tell you that to say this. We're a poor school district. The average ad valorem wealth per pupil in the state of Oklahoma is a little over $45,000. That's the average. Ours is $12,000. That ranges from a low of around $5,000 per student in the very, 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 very poor district to $639,000 per student from local wealth. I say that to tell you that state cuts, I know that doesn't sound, I see this lady looking like, what? That doesn't sound just right, does it? $639,000 per student. Numbers, facts that are real. That tells you that, and when we have 80 to 85% of your budget, as most schools do, tied up in personnel cost, when you receive cuts and you have no alternative, we don't get $639,000 per student, that only leaves one source. You got 85% tied up in personnel and related costs, so what do? You got to cut personnel. You got to reduce personnel services, and you got to cut personnel cost. I can't even begin to tell you, we've eliminated all elementary teacher assistants at Oklahoma School. I would ask for volunteers today for 35 kids in a kindergarten class with no teacher assistants. Anybody that wants to do that, we'll be glad to let you volunteer for the day. Crazy, ridiculous. We're our own worst enemy. Through the years, we have done very well at surviving the cuts and making do with less. But guys, we are down to the point where teachers are cleaning their classrooms and their buildings. We are down to the point where we have 30 to 35 kids in a classroom without any help. We are down to the point where it's the only way we can survive. And when I say we, I'm talking about education as a whole. The only way we can survive is on the backs of our students, on the backs of our parents, and on the backs of our community. It's the only way we can survive. What I mean by that is this. At Oklahoma, in particular, since Christmas, I've sent home 10 support personnel, teacher assistants, custodians, assistant librarians, and so forth and so on. You know who those people are? Those are support personnel. You know what they make? Less than $20,000 a year. You know who we're balancing our budget on? We're balancing our budget on the backs of those people that can afford it the least. That's who we're balancing the budget on. Because we're going to keep our teachers and we're going to keep, now I go by that by saying, and she said, all of our administrators have taken a 7% cut. Coaches have taken a 7% cut. 90% of that, though, has been on the backs of those people that can afford it the least. Next year, what are we going to do? That's kind of my thought, too. What are we going to do? Well, I'm going to tell you at Oklahoma, Oklahoma, as in every school in the state, everything is on the table. What do I mean by that? Guys, if you don't think about a 4-day week, you got to. At Oklahoma, that's about $50,000 to me. That's about 1% of my budget. 1%, less than 1%. But it's $50,000. That's a teacher. That's over 2 support personnel. Got to think about it. Did you know we don't have to run the buses? if you want to get mom and dad's attention, don't cover our 88 square miles and take the yellow dog to the house and pick him up at the steps every morning, okay? Don't do that. I'll probably be retired. No. But don't do that. Transportation is not required in the state of Oklahoma, guys. If we don't look at it, we've got to look at it. Everything's got to be on the table for next year. Transportation, 4-day week. If we don't resolve this education issue, it's going to get worse. You're going to be looking at programs, curriculum, activities, so forth and so on. I'll say one last thing. Before you decide that consolidation is the answer, if you get rid of all the superintendents, that's the answer. Well, you can get rid of me because I can retire. But I'm going to tell you this. If you got rid of every superintendent in the state of Oklahoma, you could give every teacher in the state of Oklahoma $611 a year, $50 a month. I'm going to tell you that if you consolidated all of the school districts in the state of Oklahoma to one school district, guess what? We're still 49th per pupil in funding, okay? Doesn't change that. Doesn't change that if there was only one school district in the state of Oklahoma. I'll be around. I'll leave you with this. Let us not seek the Republican answer or the Democratic answer, but the right answer. Let us not seek to fix the blame for the past. Guys, what's done is done. Let us accept our own responsibility for the future. John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Thank you.
My name is Shay White, and I am an alumnus of Oral Roberts University and University of Oklahoma. I am a social worker in the Tulsa area. And when I learned about the nature of the budget crisis, I was alarmed as a mental health professional and as a citizen of Oklahoma. So my concerns are general, but they are very personal. Oklahoma has one of the highest rates of mental illness and addiction in the entire country. We spend the least on our mental health system, although we have the second highest rates of adults with mental addictions. There are 700,000 to 950,000 Oklahomans who are not receiving mental and substance abuse treatment. I know you heard earlier, 4 out of 10 children are not receiving treatment. 6 out of 10 adults are not receiving treatment. And because we have not accepted to expand Medicaid, thousands more people will be without treatment. The substance abuse department is facing a $20 million cut. So allowing for these cuts attack my personal life. I am a substance abuse counselor. I have over 73 patients. They range from ages 18 to 72, and they come from various walks of life. I'm talking uninsured, not able to afford health care, unemployed, criminal backgrounds, prior convictions, uneducated, and they come for me for help, but I don't have the answers. And because I have to turn them away, I'm allowing them to experience more trauma, which I don't know if you guys understand, but having a bipolar mother and an alcoholic father, how does that affect a child that's going to a public school? So these are the things I consider when I go to work every day. When I turn these patients away, that gives them opportunities to harm themselves, harm others, self-medicate. On Christmas Day, I had a patient, early 30s, have a heart attack. She has 3 children. I see patients overdose. I had a patient pass out in my office, and I'm infuriated because they're on these waiting lists, and I mean, 9 years, that's a very long time to not be getting the help you need. I have patients who have other physical issues, not because of substance abuse. You know, they need dental work. They need psychological evaluations, things that within my capacity of a counselor, I'm not able to provide. And now I'm transitioning to get my clinical licensure, and they're cutting private practice, people who use student care to get counseling. So I have a whole lot that I feel something must be done about. We deserve accountability from our legislators. I'm infuriated to know, 9 years, the paperwork's so extensive, each year they have to reapply. What are we doing to help our people? But we're so caught up about who's in the White House that we can't even consider our neighbors, our sisters. I believe if one of us suffer, then we all suffer. I actually met with my senator last night, ahead of the session starting next week, to let him know my concerns and to let him know I'll keep him accountable and let him know we'll get rid of you. Not necessarily. But I urge you guys to join into advocacy efforts, talk to your legislators, let them know. I mean, this is personal. When you have money that you can be receiving, but we're complaining about oil prices, it's just not enough. We deserve better. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I appreciate everyone allowing me to be here today. I do have to start off, as she said, I feel it incumbent I have to say this disclaimer. Anything I say here today is my personal opinion and not that of the Department of Corrections, who I work for, or the Oklahoma Public Employees Association, which I'm a sitting board member of. So with that being said, my name is Mike Rogers, and I am a unit manager at James Crabtree Correctional Center in Helena, Oklahoma. I have chosen to serve Oklahomans in two ways. One, I'm a recently retired 26-year veteran of the Oklahoma Army National Guard, and I am now finishing my 26th year with the Oklahoma Department of Corrections. Funding is what makes core services work. Go ahead and get that. Do that. Funding is what makes core services work, and the most important of those functions in any state is public safety. We all want to feel safe. In the 26 years that I have worked in the Department of Corrections, I can tell you that agency has never been fully funded once. We have always been underfunded each and every year. Budget cuts over the years have taken a drastic toll on all state employees, not just the Department of Corrections, but in particular, the public safety sector. At my facility alone, when I started, I have seen the offender numbers rise from 400 when I started in 1990, and we are well over 1,300 at this time. We are the second largest state-ran male correctional facility in the state of Oklahoma, and we are the only open bay, open yard facility in the state. During my career, I have been furloughed. I have seen my salary cut, actually, and I went a stretch of 8 years without any pay increase of any type. I have co-workers at my facility that have gone 10 years with no pay increase of any kind. Just like teachers, many of my fellow employees, including myself, for many years we have been purchasing our own office supplies simply because of lack of funds or because of poor quality items. Safety is first and foremost in my line of work. It's not only for me, it's for the public, it's for the employee, but it's also for the offenders. People seem to forget that at times. My job is also to protect the offender. Each year we're asked to do more with less, and each year it becomes harder and harder. Programs, very important programs that these offenders could take that could possibly keep them from reoffending were the very first things that were cut. I know they're talking about budget cuts crisis this year. Our programs have been cut for several years now. Those programs are gone, and those offenders do not have that opportunity to possibly take that to keep them from becoming a statistic of recidivism. We cannot seem to increase our new hires. I've heard here this afternoon of people being let go and everything else. I can tell you from my facility alone, we're hiring right now, and we can't hire people. Nobody wants to come to work for the Department of Corrections. And people wonder why. Well, when a lot of our entry-level positions, still that person can qualify for food stamps, that could be a clue. So to basically recap what we're facing, not only just in the Department of Corrections, but all state facilities. Very few programs for offenders to take to keep from becoming a statistic of recidivism. Overcrowding, the ratios that some of you hear aren't even close to the actual ones. Few resources. Our inmate population last year at my facility alone increased over 250 in a 3-month period before the end of that financial year, and yet we were given no additional funds to meet our utility bills, clothing bills, food bills. The staff to offender ratios, as I said, are dangerously high across the state. No one doubts that safety has been compromised to a certain degree. The safety for all the people involved in the public safety field, not only the public themselves, but the employee and the offenders. To a certain degree, safety has been compromised. To put it simply, further cuts would just add to a very explosive situation. What's the solution? I don't know. You'll see me up at the Capitol with OPEA on Legislative Day. I've been talking to them every year for a number of years. I don't know what the answer is. I just know what we're doing now isn't working. So I would hope that you would join me up at the Capitol, talk to the legislators, and understand that budget cuts aren't the way to go.
I want to check in with y'all real quick. Real quick, popcorn style, one word. How are you feeling hearing these things? Somebody give me a word. Depressed, bad. What else? Anxious. What else? Challenged. Angry. Angry. When I hear all of this, I feel angry. And it's not the kind of anger that makes me want to just go berserk and go wild and do something crazy. It's a cold, calculating, strategic kind of anger. I want to get together with all of you and figure out how to do something different. When I, with Oklahoma Policy Institute, go up and talk to our legislators, I find that many of them say they never hear from their constituents, or when they do, it's just a flood of emails and form letters at the last moment. Last week, I was privileged to be able to facilitate a panel of senators, and one of them said, often it's not about which legislators you know, but which ones know you. There are two that represent you, and I think as Oklahomans, many of us tend to write them off. The things that we hear on the news, especially the national news about Oklahoma and our legislators, are very off-putting. But the reality is, when you dig in and you get to know these people, each and every one of them has done something good, something you like. And if you can go in there and you can meet them, as Shay did last night with Senator Matthews, and you can say, hey, thank you for this thing that you did, and here's what I'm concerned about. Here's my story. Here's what's going on with me. It's a different kind of situation. This is the kind of strategy that we're bringing with Together Oklahoma. The ability to go into that legislator's office, to tell them your story, and hopefully make your story something that they share when they're on the floor debating. If they haven't heard your stories, if they don't know your stories, then they don't have any impetus to go up there and say, I'm going to vote a little bit different than some of my colleagues here, because I know what is going on with Shay and with Jimmy. You need to come together in a different way. I know that many of the folks in this room are very active specifically on issues. The Together Oklahoma Coalition started back in 2012, and let me give you just a little bit more history before we hear some more testimonials. In 2012, Kansas was slashing away at their budget, slashing away at their income tax, and Oklahoma was geared up to do the exact same thing. And at that time, they thought it was a slam dunk. The legislators did not think that there was any opposition to this, but David Blatt and OK Policy reached out to some folks and people came together and said, don't cut our taxes when you don't have a revenue solution. And that year, there was no tax cut. That was because of you all. You all did that. You talked to them and made it change. But the legislators learned from that session that a full frontal Kansas-style assault wasn't going to work in Oklahoma. And so they've come at us with these tax cut triggers that incrementally change things. And more of the tax breaks that when you, a little break here and a little break there, all these little breaks have added up into that big hole that David showed you this morning. Those tax breaks are something that we can't afford, and the legislators need to hear the reasonable solutions from you, both your story and these stories. So I'm going to bring some more folks up here right now to tell you more about why.
Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Adams Cornell. I am a Native American advocate, a mother of 2 kids from Oklahoma City Public Schools, and I'm one of those that would like to see Indigenous Peoples Day in Oklahoma City. I work with my Native community to add cultural learning and events like Oklahoma History Day to take the place of harmful land run reenactments in our schools in the hopes that the next generation will battle less with racial injustice than we do. Cutting the school's budget will make it even harder to make this teaching happen. Parents and teachers are asked to do more with less. We will have to pull from our already stretched budgets to provide materials from teachers and parents for this essential cultural learning to happen. Tax cuts equal children suffering. Our reduced budget means less money for programs that provide school uniforms and supplies that families depend on. We already don't have enough to go around. This will put an even bigger strain on families to provide these materials, meaning more work hours away from home, which means more time away from our kids. That time could be used to help them study and read and teaching those lessons that came from quality time together. This will impact their performance in the classroom, which will impact test scores and overall school ratings. It's strange to me that we have a hard time understanding and communicating that tax cuts for the wealthy and tax breaks for big business means less money for those who need it most, our kids. We have to make that message easier for everyday citizens like myself to understand. Make it easier for us to get information on how elected officials voted to empower us to make changes needed at the polls. If you communicate how these changes impact our lives directly without needing a law degree to understand them, we will want to do something about it because we care about our kids and we will do what it takes to make sure they have what they need. That's why I've joined Together OK, and I urge you to do the same. We must find real solutions together for our kids and communities of color. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Eileen Bradshaw. I'm with the Community Food Bank of Eastern Oklahoma. We serve the 24 eastern counties of the state. I'm also a parent of 2 graduates of Tulsa Public School and 1 current student, so I've got 2 hats on today. The Community Food Bank doesn't receive state funding, so I had to think a little bit when Kara Joy called to talk to me. But I can assure you that we do receive the unintended blowback from these cuts in state funding. I almost cried when I heard Shay talking because when there are cuts to mental health and people aren't able to get treatment or stay on their medication, they are not able to be productive, they're not able to stay at work, they end up at our doorstep. When there are cuts in education, kids who can't stay in college, people who drop out, or frankly, folks who are graduating but not getting the education preparing them for the workforce, they end up at our door. Folks who aren't getting their medical needs met, they're too sick, they lose jobs, they end up at our door. And, the food bank, the charitable feeding system, we have some fabulous partners, and we all want to do more. I mean, it's a passion. It's why we go to work every day. But I'll tell you, the charitable food system cannot take over the responsibility of this state to its people. We just can't do it, no matter what we want to do. And so I guess, when they were talking about education, every time that Tulsa Public Schools goes on holiday, we see cafeteria workers, teachers' aides coming to our doors to get food because they're not paid on vacations. And we actually see some teachers coming to our partners as well, because depending on the family size, many of them actually don't meet the income guidelines to get help. We see many military families. I think sometimes when you hear 1 in 6 Oklahomans are food insecure, it doesn't have a face, and the faces are all around us, and these cuts at the state level are just increasing that pool and increasing the really tough road that so many of our neighbors are having to hoe. So I guess, my call to action would be, just when you're talking to folks, first, if we can accept those Medicaid expansion, that would go a long way. And secondarily, when we're talking to our legislators, I had a great conversation with a legislator, and he said, so you're telling me the churches need to do more? No. I'm telling you that, we need the state to be a partner with charitable organizations and with all the citizens, because it's going to take all of us, and it's a partnership. Thank you.
The second craziest thing I ever did in my life was I jumped off an airplane at night. That was in U.S. Army Airborne School. That was the summer of 2006. The first crazy thing that I ever did in my life was I became a public school teacher in Oklahoma. I think the path that led me there is so powerful. Before I became a teacher here, I was working for the budget chairman of the United States Senate. And one day I was riding home with him after housing at his house. Dog, that's what I was taking care of, really. And I asked him a question. And this is back in 2010. And he's a man that was in charge of the budget. And the federal government had just shut down temporarily. And I asked him the question, what is the most important issue in Congress right now? And what he told me was this: education. And at that time, it made no sense to me. That's all he said was just education. He shook my hand, and I got out. And what was weird is, a couple months after the conversation, I told him, I'm leaving your office. I'm quitting. And I joined an organization called Teach for America. And I came here in 2011 in Oklahoma City as part of the very first group of Teach for America teachers to come here. And everything he said in the car suddenly made sense, because this is what happened. I had 5 weeks of training. I was not taught well how to become a teacher. You cannot learn how to be a teacher in 5 weeks. We'll just say that, no matter what. Okay, now, with that being said, everything here has been about the budget. I've seen things completely differently. The first school I taught was called Centennial Mid-High. If you look at my thing, my name is Stephen Weber, by the way, it says Crooked Oak Public Schools. I used to first teach in Oklahoma City Public Schools. The first school that I ever taught at was Centennial Mid-High. It is the lowest performing school in the state of Oklahoma. These are the things that I saw there. Teachers did not have pencils for their students to provide. I'm sure you guys have all heard that before. Teachers were buying their own paper. They had printing allocations. Oh no, but let's add to this. There was consultants coming into the school. They're getting paid $6,000 per day. I do not make that number up. If you do not believe that number, go and look at some of the contracts that school boards have actually approved. Look through those documents. Every single meeting, there would be a consultant, and it's a contract for $2,000, $3,000 per day. How that is possible, I do not understand. But this is what I will say. From my time of education in Oklahoma City, I have been here now for 5 years. And with that, this is what I will say. Oklahoma simply does not value its students. It does not value its future leaders. I don't know how the best way to say it. This is what has resulted. We have a school-to-prison pipeline. For the last 18 years, females have been the #1 incarcerated in this state, in this nation, since 1998. Males, on the other hand, have been at times #2 for their incarceration since 1998. Right now, I believe that we are #4. I do not know how else to describe a school-to-prison pipeline. When I think about my own students, this is what I say. I've had students commit murder. I've had students I've had students become murder. I've had students go to jail for many, many, many different ways. When you teach in a school like Centennial Mid-High, and then I went to John Marshall Mid-High, and then I went to a different school where I'm currently at, Cricket Public Schools. The things that you work with, it is difficult. It is impossible at times. It is the most difficult job I've ever had in my life. I will say, hands down, if I compare that to U.S. Army Airborne School, being a teacher is far more difficult. Now, with that being said, I'm sure you guys wonder, what am I going to do? This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to say it right away, this is my last year of teaching. Sometimes enough is enough. I am now okay with the things that are happening at this moment. Okay. Now, with that being said, the very first thing I'm going to do is May 18th, I'm going to travel to the Middle East. I'm going to go to Turkey, Egypt, Israel, Jordan. I explore the world. Last summer, I spent in Nicaragua. Why do I do it? I see the things that are out there. And this is what I'm going to do when I come back. There's a favorite quote I learned in Teach for America. And I want to make this dream a reality in this state. It is this. One day, all children in this nation will have an opportunity to attain an excellent education. I want to make that possible. Thank you, and Godspeed.
There were 2 words on the schedule as I looked at it that really stood out to me, ironically enough. Those 2 words were front lines. Those words resonated with me because, first, my name is Stacy Hester. They resonated with me because I'm a U.S. Marine. I spent a lot of years on active duty with Special Operations Command Unit, where I did many, many jumps out of airplanes. In addition, after leaving the Marine Corps, I now work for Community Service Council with Veterans Treatment Court as a coordinator and a consultant for Justice for Vets out of D.C., where I travel the country as an advocate for veterans. I want to give you guys some visibility. So I'm going to ask a few questions. It's going to require you raising your hand, and I would ask you keep your hands in the air. How many in this room right now are a U.S. military veteran? Raise your hand. Keep them up. If you're a veteran, raise your hand and keep it up. How many in this room are married to a veteran? Keep them up. How many in this room know or have a family member who is a veteran? If you have a family member, I don't care how distant. How many in this room have friends who are veterans? Raise your hand. Now I want everybody to look around the room. I want you to see whose lives veterans touch. We touch all of society. The challenge for us as warriors, and as a Marine, I rounded out my career training Marines. You know what we do? We kill bad guys. Is that hard to hear? Probably. We killed a lot of them. I trained warriors. You know what I can do? You know what I wasn't able to do as a U.S. Marine? Train the warrior out of the warrior. There's a cultural divide that exists between military culture and civilian culture. And the greatest evidence of that cultural divide is that 22 U.S. veterans are committing suicide every single day. 22. 1 active duty is committing suicide every day. I'm a coordinator for Veterans Treatment Court, a program that is saving the lives of veterans. We have a 96% success rate of veterans that plead into our program, and that statistic is pretty consistent nationwide. The first Veterans Treatment Court was in 2008. Tulsa was the 3rd. We have more than 250 Veterans Treatment Courts nationwide now that boast a success rate of about 95% completion. It's $20,000 to keep a veteran incarcerated in Oklahoma annually. To keep anyone incarcerated, $20,000 annually. Our program costs about $3,000 annually. We have over 100 veterans in Tulsa Veterans Treatment Court alone. We service at Community Service Council for the courts over 800 clients who would otherwise be in prison at $20,000 per person annually. You can do the math. We're saving lives. So here's the question that we have to face. FEBA, the front lines, It's in your schedule there. In the Marine Corps, we call that the FEBA, the forward edge of the battle area. Guess what? You're on it. You are the forward edge of the battle area. So what do? Bring others to the forward edge of the battle area to fight the fight, because these programs are saving lives, and when these cuts happen, it does impact our funding. So this is it, the question. Our veterans fought for the ideas and the liberties that have defined this nation. I fought for those. Will we now not fight for our veterans to sustain the funding that provides for these programs? That's the question. Will we now not fight for the heroes of this nation? Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Stacy. At this time, I'm going to ask the front two rows to stand up, and we have group 4 over here to come up, and then group 5 to come up as well. If you all can do the switcheroo, be careful getting off this stage. Perfect. Huh? Okay, no, you're all right. We'll be fine. So while they're coming up here, I want to tell you all a little bit about, I mentioned that the legislators learned that that they had to do things differently. Oh, and yeah, group 5, come on up. The Together Oklahoma Coalition learned that we have to change our strategy as well. And so while in previous years we were mostly a steering committee of agency heads and organizational leaders, we've now started chapters in Tulsa and Oklahoma City. We have Norman, Stillwater, and Lawton already interested in coming and being a part of these chapters. And what we're doing is we're teaching people how to be advocates and how to form an identity in their district. As Shay mentioned, she spoke with her legislator, one of her legislators last night, along with several other constituents. We're getting together in groups by constituent instead of by issue, in order to develop a relationship, because one thing that our legislators tell us is that they want to hear specifically from their constituents. We have a goal to have at least 2 people in every district by the end of this year, and that is not a difficult goal. I think we can do it. I think we can do it with all of you. Every day, more people join the OK Policy List, and all of those people can become activated and do something about all the stories you're hearing about today. So, Kelly Doyle, please come up.
Good afternoon. My name is Kelly Doyle. I'm the State Director for the Center for Employment Opportunities, or CEO, and we provide an immediate job for immediate pay for over 600 individuals coming out of our prison and jails each year. We have offices in both Tulsa and Oklahoma City. I will be very brief, seeing as we have a lot of speakers. We all know that criminal justice, or that incarceration, is an issue in our state. We rank number 2 at incarcerating per capita, and the impacts on families and communities is the collateral impacts are extensive. It's a very exciting year because this year we see criminal justice has risen to a point of bipartisan support. We know that our justice system is not keeping us safer and that changes need to be made. And quite frankly, cutting incarceration rates is not that difficult, technically speaking. You parole more people, you change sentencing laws, you decriminalize marijuana. Politically, that might be challenging, but technically it's not. But the supports for the individuals who are dealing with substance abuse issues, mental health issues that are really filling up our prisons have to be funded. We have several amazing programs in Oklahoma: Remerge, Women in Recovery, Center for Employment Opportunities, TEAM, who are doing really amazing things, evidence-based, proven to keep people either from going to prison or coming back from prison, and none of us receive state dollars. And we will not be able to sustain ourselves forever without support from the state. If we are preventing people from going to prison, then the state needs to reinvest the dollars that they save in organizations like ours so that we can support individuals as they're fighting the core issues that are putting them in prison in the first place. So, thank you.
Hi, my name is Wanda Felty, and I'm married. My husband and I work a full-time job in Oklahoma City, and we have a photography business in Norman. But the most important part of me is I'm mom to 3 girls. My middle daughter, Kayla, has developmental disabilities. She's 27 years old, and she lives in my home. So a developmental disability is a mental or physical disability that is acquired before the age of 18. That's Oklahoma's definition. And in order to qualify for developmental disability services in Oklahoma, you have to have an IQ score of 18 or below. That's really important because you heard David talk about that waiting list. That's who we're talking about. IQ of 70 or below, acquired before the age of 18. So David was right. There's over 7,000 people. Actually, there's 7,261 people, Oklahomans, on the waiting list right now. David, your number's off a little bit. As of February 2nd of this year, it's going to be a 10-year wait. 10 years, somebody told them, take a number and wait. Think about what we're talking about here. My daughter, she did survive the waiting list, and it is a survival when you're on that list because you think nobody knows you. So Kayla received services, and because of those services, I can work my full-time job, my husband can work his full-time job, and we can have our photography business. So I say that because I want you to know about the people on the waiting list first. Every year, I hear from families whose kids are graduating from high school, and you know what I hear? One of us has to quit our job because it's not safe for them to be home alone. So a two-family income goes down to a one-family income as soon as that child graduates from high school. That's their knowledge for the rest of their life. What did that do to the economy and their economics of their family and their community? What did it do to the individual? We're talking isolation here. This is real. So I've got to tell you, the budget problem that we're talking about today is not really what drove the waiting list. I told you, it's a 10-year wait. No one has been respecting that waiting list for a long time. So the budget issue now, it just kind of magnifies it. We think it's big at 7,000. Hold on, buckle up. Here's the other issue. My daughter receives services at home so that I can work. What's going to happen? They're fixing to start cutting her budget. What happens to my income? It gets cut in half. We sell our photography business. We become a one-family income. It cuts down to 40%. One last question for you. Think about retirement. Everybody here's got a retirement vision? Going to travel the world? Going to garden, crafts, jump out of an airplane, fly an airplane? Parents of kids with developmental disabilities don't get to envision retirement. I envision that I'm going to bathe Kayla and take care of her for the rest of my life. When I can't do it anymore, who's going to do it? We didn't build capacity in our communities. This is the forgotten, most vulnerable. Kids are vulnerable, aging is vulnerable. Who's going to take care of our kids for the rest of their life? We've got to have money for that DDSD services.
Hello, I am Janet Cizak, and I am the CEO of an outpatient counseling agency in Northeast Oklahoma that provides mental health and addiction services to thousands of individuals and family. But more importantly, I am the mother, sister, aunt, niece, granddaughter, friend, and coworker to somebody who struggles with a mental illness or a substance use disorder. We all know somebody with one of these brain diseases. It's clearly the health epidemic of our generation. And as you've heard here today, many Oklahomans were one of the highest in the nation for prevalence. 1 in 4 of us, 1 in 4, that's 1 in 4 students, 1 in 4 of your employees will struggle with a mental illness. And yet our state ranks dead last for funding, as you've heard here today. What I want you to know is that recovery from these illnesses is real. It's a reality. Treatments are extremely cost-effective and economical. However, Oklahoma has failed to adequately fund mental health and addiction services, which has led to a $5 billion cost associated with not funding that, such as you've heard here today of overburdened social services system, poor health outcomes, lack of public safety, and extreme prison overcrowding. What I want you to know is that I'm a huge mental health and treatment advocate. I'm extremely honored to be part of a very well-educated, well-connected system of providers here in Oklahoma. But after decades and decades of underfunding, Many of our counselors and therapists that work in this field do the jobs of 2 to 3 people because we can't cut services to those individuals who need it the most. So we do more and more and more with less and less, which is what you've heard here. In fact, many of my counterparts have had to close their doors of their counseling businesses because they can no longer make income and expenses meet. And yet more people try to access services every day. You know, and none of these people, a lot of these people who try to access services have no funding, no insurance, no way to pay. And many counseling agencies already provide hundreds of thousands of dollars annually in pro bono services. Because what we know is that when people in crisis can't access these services, sometimes people die, as you heard here today. Mental health and addiction can lead to suicide, homicide, and overdoses. And this keeps me up at night as a CEO. Do I continue to provide more and more free service, or do I know that somebody on the waiting list may die? As a state, we can no longer fail to address this huge issue, our brain health, the most important organ in our body. So I urge you to contact your legislator and beg them to set aside politics and accept the federal money and expand Medicaid here in Oklahoma. It's the right thing to do because our citizens matter. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Trent Rattery. I have worked at the Boys and Girls Club for the last 2 years. I worked anywhere from kindergarten up to teenagers. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my time at the club. In the 2 years that I was at the club, I came across some circumstances with some of the youth that I found very alarming. I was a big proponent of homework time. That was the big thing I pushed. With an athletic background, I didn't put enough time on my own homework, so when I worked with kids, that was my big thing with school. In the times that I spent working with the kids on their homework, I noticed myself in a lot of situations where it would be, "Where's your textbook?" And the kid would say, "It wasn't my day." And I said, "What does that mean? It wasn't your day?" Well, they only got to see their math textbook 2 times a week. Some kids didn't get to see it at all. If they had homework, they had to take a picture on a small BlackBerry-style phone, terrible resolution, and try to use the phone to do their best on their math homework. I found that pretty alarming. There was one other student that I specifically, I'm going to call him Will for the sake of the story. Will, he had a hard time reading. He could read, but it just took him some time. He had a hard time with patterns. He had a hard time recognizing and discerning the letters. It would take him, what would take a different youth on reading level, it would take him an extra hour or two to do the same worksheet. And the problem with that is whenever you have a reading issue, it carries over to every subject. You can't read the directions, you can't do. So needless to say, Will really needed some one-on-one help. And as you know, as a lot of other people have said, support staff gets cut when budgets get cut. When there's a lack of money to pay people, you have one teacher for 40 kids. It's the same issues that we see up here. And the problem with that is kids like Will, the child that I tutored every day for 4 hours a day almost, that would leave crying, they suffer. They disappear in the crowd. They need one-on-one help. So basically that brings me to my conclusion. Just like everybody else is saying, we got to get in touch with our legislators. We can't settle for tax cuts and tax expenditures, and we don't need that. We need education. We need people to be trained for other industries so that we don't have to ride the roller coaster anymore. Thank you.
At this time, our fellows, Alexandra and Cassandra and others, are going to be bringing around some sign-up sheets. If you have not signed up for our advocacy alerts, please do so because I will be emailing people next Tuesday to let you know how to get in touch with other people in your districts.
Hi, my name's Camille Landry, and unlike a lot of the people here, I don't represent any particular organization or any particular interest group. One of the things that it's my pleasure and privilege to do is to write a blog series for Oklahoma Policy Institute entitled Neglected Oklahoma. And I take stories of real people, our real neighbors, our real family members, our real friends, and put them forward for other people to consider so that there is a human face on the policy decisions that this state and our cities and townships and counties make. And let me tell you, it brings me to tears every time I have to write it. I originally planned to put some pretty graphics up there with a bunch of numbers because I really like the numbers. In my last incarnation, I was a serious wonk. But I was told I couldn't throw any more numbers at you, so I decided to tell a story. Let me start by saying, and I brought some graphics, but they're kind of small. One of my favorite authors, Audre Lorde, said, "There's no such thing as a single-issue struggle because we do not live single-issue lives." So I want to tell you the story about a family that represents a perfect storm of these issues. And I want you to consider the intersectionality of these issues and what that means in terms of public policy and in terms of the way we choose to live our lives. A young mother in her 30s, who herself spent her teen years in foster care, grew up, managed to get a certificate as a dental hygienist. That would be a good job, a good outcome for a kid in foster care. She went on to have 3 children, a daughter, and then some years later, 2 little boys, with her second husband. To make a long story short, those children, the 2 younger ones, are in foster care now, and the older one has aged out of foster care. The family experienced what I'd like to call a perfect storm of circumstances and conditions and decisions made on a political level that affected them on an extremely personal level. Issues like gender. Gender is significant because Oklahoma locks up more women than any place else on the planet per capita. We are number 1. How many of us, quick show of hands, are tired of hearing that kind of Oklahoma is number 1 statistic? You know, there are a lot of them. Poor health, poor mental health services, the lack of access to basic services for people affected this family. Living in a community in which everybody in the community just about suffers from poor health and from environmental assaults that cause problems. Her youngest son was born with developmental difficulties that are very likely related to toxins you hear about the Flint, Michigan lead crisis. Turns out Oklahoma is one of the tops in the nation for lead contamination in our drinking water. Okay, so her baby suffers from this. We're looking at poor education and poor educational outcomes, inequality of wealth, the general problems relating to poverty, the criminal injustice system, I hesitate to call it anything different, the criminalization of poverty, and problems that people with sexual orientations that might not be popular often encounter. So this is what happened. Mom, 30 seconds, oh boy. Kids ended up in foster care. Oldest daughter ended up in foster care. We push public services onto the private sector. Oldest daughter is a lesbian. She was put into a foster home run by an agency of conservative Christians. Can you guess what the outcome is? Oldest daughter is now pregnant. How did this happen, you say, since she doesn't like boys? She traded her body for a place to stay. The youngest boy with developmental disabilities, is institutionalized at the moment. The middle child, a young child that was reading when he entered kindergarten, is now being held back from his 3rd grade classroom. Time for me to go. Let me just end by saying once again, there's no such thing as a single issue struggle because none of us live single issue lives.
Good afternoon. Gee, I feel like we're at the Oscars with that 30 seconds on. Okay, my name is J.R. Atkinson. I'm a member of Divine Wisdom Worship Center Church. I was raised in a loving, middle-class Catholic home, and I tell you this so that you understand that I am not a product of my environment. I take full responsibility for my actions. Growing up, I struggled with depression. I chose to deal with that depression, as so many people do, in the wrong way, and I began using drugs to self-medicate. I spent 10 years as a heroin addict. Because of my addiction, in 2013, I was arrested on drug-related nonviolent crimes and spent a year in Oklahoma County Jail. While in jail, the suffering I experienced brought about a change in my heart. God spoke to me and told me that this is not what I was meant for, and with the priceless gift of humility, I endeavored to change my life. My pastor, Theodis Manning, got me out of what could have been a 30-year prison sentence and into his rehabilitation program, which I graduated a year later on June 5th, 2015. But now that I am no longer a prisoner of the state, I'm a prisoner of a different kind. I'm a prisoner of debt. I am paying $60 a month in probation fees for 2 years. I pay $50 a month in court costs totaling over $2,000. I pay $40 a month in DA fees totaling over $1,000. But getting my license back, my driver's license, will be by far the most daunting prospect. First, there is a $170 assessment. Then there is a $1,295 total for reinstatement and revocation fees. Then I have to take a DUI class, about approximately $400. Then they will give me my license back as long as I buy a car, provide insurance, and once I do that, they're going to put a breathalyzer in my car for $150 a month for 18 months. That's $4,565 in total, not including the amount for the car and the insurance, just to get my license back, and I wasn't even drinking and driving. So I ask you now, have I not paid my debt to society? Do I not deserve the chance to rehabilitate myself without the crushing weight of debt? I think so. Just like this man over here, wherever he is, the vet, that honorable vet that just stood in front of you, had you all raise your hands? I guarantee you, if I asked you right now, if anyone that you know or is in your family is struggling with what I'm going through, everyone in this room would raise their hands. Thank you.
We're all in eager anticipation for good news. The only good news I can offer is I'm the next to the last testimonial today. I'm very impressed that this room is still full of folks. This is my third budget summit. We know what we're up against. It's time, more than time, to do something about it. I'm the executive director, Bill Major, I'm the executive director of one of the more generous family foundations in the state, the Anna Henry Zero Foundation and the Maxine and Jack Zero Family Foundation. And I can tell you that a large part of my job is listening to the very stories that you have listened to for the last 2 hours. And it is crushing, can be crushing, to know that the stories in Oklahoma among nonprofit organizations that are seeking private philanthropic support are like this, not just in one afternoon, but in every afternoon of every day of the year. We must stop this race to the bottom. Now, the role that we play in private philanthropic support in this state is incredible. We're helping incredible nonprofit organizations do miracles every day. But on the downside of that, there are some folks on Lincoln Avenue in Oklahoma City that think that private philanthropy can pick up the pieces of careless budget cuts that go on every year in Oklahoma. And I guess my testimony to you today is there is not enough money to even come close to picking up the pieces from the budget cuts from these irresponsible reductions in revenue in the state of Oklahoma. So please don't assume that private philanthropy can dig us out of this hole. To give you an example, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, we have a significant chronic and veteran homeless problem. And 23 nonprofit organizations came together last year with a commitment for Zero 2016, along with Oklahoma City and Norman. And between these three communities, we're going to end veteran homelessness and end chronic homelessness by the end of this year. And consequently, 298 veterans that were homeless in Tulsa last year found permanent homes. Solutions are there to these social problems that our legislators would like to think are intractable and unsolvable. We can solve those problems, but it does take the support and the willingness for all of us to be taxed appropriately to provide that base level of support. We all know this. We're all in this room. We've heard it all. We have to go back with a double-down commitment to make a difference this year. It's not just the budget year, it's an election year, but there's work that's going to take, as the folks from Kansas said, probably a generation to get us out of this hole. I want to say that on behalf of private philanthropy, we're going to do our part, but we're not the solution to budget cuts. We've got to make Oklahoma great. We've got to support all the creative nonprofits that are out there, and we've got to do what we can do to change the trajectory of our state. Thank you.
Well, you've done it. You've made it to the end. I'm the last speaker. Congratulations to the Hardy out there. My name is Heather Sparks, and I was the 2009 Oklahoma Teacher of the Year. I was also the presidential awardee for secondary mathematics. And as an award-winning teacher, I've spent much of my career training the up-and-coming teachers, the student teachers, and the future teachers of Oklahoma, and even the new teachers once they get there. And sadly, over the last few years, I've noticed a new trend. As those teachers finish their semester with me, they choose a job in another state, typically just a few 100 miles in either direction. Really pick a direction, and you're going to make more money as a teacher. This is completely heartbreaking to me. These very well-prepared teachers are leaving our state, and as a result, our students get what's left. We have a lot of great people coming out of the woodwork to become alternatively certified, and I certainly appreciate the effort. And this year, we have 1,000 people who have decided to become a teacher through emergency certification. All that means is they have a bachelor's degree. Nothing else. No training to know how to work with and really teach students. We're doing our children a terrible disservice. If you're like most Oklahomans, when you hear the average teacher salary in Oklahoma is $44,812, you think, well, that's a pretty good salary. Keep in mind that's the average teacher salary. A new teacher takes home $31,600. Now, as a math teacher, I want to put that in different perspective. I want to talk about my salary. Last year, I taught 8th grade algebra and pre-algebra at Taft Middle School in Oklahoma City. As a 22-year veteran with a master's degree plus 45 hours of graduate credit, I earned $2,022 a month after my taxes and insurance were paid. That works out to $466.62 a week. If you can't do the math, that's less than minimum wage when you consider I work about 70 hours a week. We can do better for not only our teachers, but our children. Now, luckily, I had the opportunity to earn extra money through additional jobs here and there, and many teachers across the state do the same thing every day. If you were to poll an average teacher, more than half of them have an extra job, sometimes a full-time job if they're a single parent. So just imagine if at the end of your day, after working with students, the bell rings, you finish your extra 20 or 30 minutes after school, and then you head to your other job. Then when that job ends at 9:30 or 10, imagine their exhaustion. They head home, they get a little sleep, they wake up, and they do it all again. I am really, really concerned that more Oklahomans aren't alarmed by the situation we've put ourselves in, but I know I am coming together with others. I know it's important that we gather. I work with a local organization, Voices Organized in Civic Engagement, to seek solutions to the problems of low teacher salaries and other issues facing Oklahoma families. And I encourage you to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you all for speaking, and thank you all for listening. We've been coming together as Together Oklahoma to do something different, and when we come together, one of the greatest questions I've heard from a young man here in Oklahoma City with Together OKC was he asked me last week, how do I get my friends involved with Together Oklahoma if they're already part of an organization that has a lobbyist and they feel like that's being taken care of at the Capitol? And I said, there are a lot of things you could say in this situation, but what I would ask them is it working? Is what we've been doing working? Is being siloed by issue working for us? Is having a day at the Capitol for your specific issue and leaving it to that day working? The answer is it's not. And while we have great lobbyists and experts up there talking to our legislators, the Oklahoma electorate has to do something different. And so I hope that you will let me have the opportunity to get you connected with other people in your district, to be able to make a change directly with the people who represent you. And if you're an organizational leader, I hope that you'll come to our organizational leaders meeting so that we can make sure that our messaging is strategically aligned. There's so much that we can do as Oklahomans, but we have to get past this fear that we don't know enough, or that we can't change it, or that our voices don't matter. We have to stop looking outside at the federal government, because really what is happening here is what matters. And it doesn't matter whoever is elected president, it matters, it does, but whoever is elected president, they aren't going to be able to fix what Oklahoma is doing to itself. That's something that we have to do ourselves. And so when I think about fear, what is the antidote to fear? Well, in my experience, it's not just be brave, because sometimes you just feel fear. I like to remember the quote, feel the fear and do it anyway. I feel afraid that all of this is going to keep going, but I have to do something to change it. And what pushes me to do it anyway is that I am so curious. What would it look like if we knew each other, if we knew each other's stories, and if when our legislators said to us, so you don't want me to cut your funding, who do you want me to cut? Instead of giving them a list of our priorities, we said no. I don't want you to cut anything until you look at the reasonable revenue options. Here they are. That's what I need from you all, and I hope that you'll join Together Oklahoma, and I hope that we'll see each other again here soon. Thank you so much, and have a great day.
So before we adjourn, I just want to mention that for those who would like to get a copy of my presentation or Annie and Dwayne's presentation, they're up on the website. The address is there, or you can get to it from the OK Policy homepage. If you are not signed up to receive our email alerts, hope that you'll do so before you leave so we can stay in touch with you. And I'm just so particularly grateful to all the citizens of Oklahoma who, we actually set up a hashtag Humans of Oklahoma to reflect the voices that we heard, and want to thank them, Kara Joy McKee, on her birthday for putting together this great afternoon panel, and all of you for being here. It's not an easy or joyous message that we've been able to share, but I hope that you leave feeling better informed and feeling ready to get to work and having an impact over the next few months. Thank you very much. Sorry to be the hard ass.